Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you for that welcome for country. That was great. Now, I also acknowledge the original owners and traditional owners of this country and the land on which we stand, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, my research project, Thomas Dixon and Sons. My research question was, what makes a company a distinguished business, recognised by its leaders in its field, whether that be today or tomorrow? So I looked at T C Dixon for answers to this question. I begin my story about the company with Thomas Coar Dixon's own account of his how he started up his business, and he shared this with guests at the opening of his factory in 1908. Now, I've got a voiceover here. You'll have to use your imagination and imagine that young Zach is a 60-year-old Yorkshireman. That's Thomas Coar Dixon. Let's hear what he had to...
I suppose you'll expect a few observations from the past and present. I had a small tannery in New South Wales, and my brother wrote that he thought there was a better opening here. So I came, and a friend brought me out to look at the place where the tannery is now, and I got the place cheap and started the tannery in a very small way. Hill End was very different in those good old days. There were only 7 houses on the side of the hill, and we were free of all taxes.
I suppose that's an interesting start to the story. There are lots of clues to the longevity and business success of T C Dixon and Sons, and that's the name I'll be using throughout this presentation, although there were variations on that over the years. Now, without putting too much emphasis on T C Dixon's Quaker origins, there are some connections to be made. TC was born in 1845 to a Quaker family in Bradford, Yorkshire. He was educated at a Quaker school, and his elder brother, Joseph, who arrived in Australia just 2 years earlier, was quite active in the Australian Quaker movement, and it was Joseph who helped start the first Quaker community farm in the Sunshine Coast area. The brothers do appear to have been very close together. Sometimes TC children often stayed with Joseph up on the Sunshine Coast, and they also had properties in the same area. Moreover, in terms of connections with the Quakerism and business, this is what David Hurst, who's a writer and management consultant and educator, has said. Business was seen as part of their religious calling, and their reputation for honesty and plain dealing in all that they did attracted the players in the emerging markets to them. Some say that the Quakers pioneered the concept of a market price by refusing to sell similar goods to different people at different prices. Now, another commentator says Quakers were very successful in business because they were very determined, very hard-working people who used their initiative. Now, whilst we know very little of TC's commitment to Quaker life, that he sent his boys to the Friends School in Tasmania suggests some adherence to Quaker values. Young William and Edward were enrolled in the school from 1895 to 1898, and Ernest, his other son, from 1897 to 1899. And this is an early image of the... Oh, sorry. Messed that up, didn't I? Well and truly. That's an early image of the school in Hobart. You see the building at the back was Hopeful. Now, Quakerism aside, clearly TC was a determined man. Neither fires nor floods deterred him. And this is the image. We haven't got a date on this image. It was the workers at the tannery, and we think the figure in the middle would be T C Dixon son William. And the skin that's been displayed is, I've been reassured by a tanner, a sheepskin, sheep hide. Now, as I said, he was a determined man. Neither fires nor flood deterred him. The first major setback was a fire in Friday, the 27th of October in 1885. Other than one shed, all of the buildings housing the tannery and the boot factory were destroyed. Machinery, hides, finished goods, all of it. Now, TC rebuilt only to have the newer premises inundated in the 1893 floods.
I started in Russell Street, and later I built a 2-storey factory 50 by 20 long, facing Montague Road, and after sent it down the paddock on a roller. I then put up another, and all were destroyed by fire, which gave me a great setback, as I was not half covered. I was encouraged to make another start, which I did, and I added imported boots to my business, but found this took too much capital and abandoned it. I might do another read of that one if you don't. Okay.
Oh, Zach, please be quiet. And this is how he recalled the events at the opening, first of the tannery rebuilt, and then the new boot factory. And first, that image of the tannery was taken sometime later after additions were made. So let's see.
Things were on the increase until the 1893 flood, which damaged 1,500 pound of boots and swept the tannery shed away. We had to make a fresh start. Since then, our business has been increasing. We could not put on more hands owing to the room, and my customers were always complaining at the delay of their goods, until my son urged me to put up a decent place. I first secured the land on the quiet, then I went to Sydney and saw some of the latest boot factory buildings. I then put the matter in the architect's hands, Mr. Gailey, and with my suggestion and his skill, we have the present magnificent building. There are larger factories, but second to none in appearance in the Commonwealth.
And this is his magnificent building. The date on this, not definite, but somewhere in the early 1900s. We can see that this is a substantial business with a very large workforce. There's now also some residential development in this area of Hill End. West End, and this area was called Hill End at the time. Now, it's certainly come a long way from those early days when there were lonely 7 houses on the hill. And here is TC himself, with some of his staff outside his new building. It was taken over 1908 or 1909. And as he told his audience, this factory was a monument to pluck, and his boots were top quality.
This building, 200 foot long by 45 foot wide, with suction gas engine, 42 horsepower, and 2 stories, will be here when I and my sons have long passed away, as a monument of pluck and indomitable perseverance can do. And I can come to no other conclusion that the blessing of God was with me. I've always tried to do what is right. And if anything went wrong, I always remedied it. In consequence, I can deal with everyone that I did with in the early start. In the passage you see some of my latest production in boots and leather, and when I see them now and compare them with what we used to turn out, it is simply remarkable. In the early days, they were satisfied with Blucher, Cossack and Bowles. I think our goods compare favourably with the South, only that there is better materials and soles in them.
Quality products and determination alone don't guarantee business success. Initiative is also key. TC was not the first to emerge at tannery with boot making, but it did give him a synergistic impact for the company. Boot making began as a side effort to the tannery, adding stability and control. The missing aspect of what we would today call vertical integration was retail side. Now, this was added in 1882 when TC opened a store in Brisbane, and soon after that, he helped his brother Joseph buy a bootmaker's business in Gympie, the Busy Bee, and Joseph ran that business for 11 years, obviously supplied with boots from his brother Thomas. The year following the opening of that magnificent building, on the 17th of November 1909, TC passed away. But he'd laid a strong foundation for the company's growth. The small tannery had expanded to boot production and an export trade in hides. The two sides of the business went from strength to strength. And this was done under his sons. Ernest handled the boot-making side, and son William handled the tannery. Now, there are no company records left to confirm the growth of the company, but there are other sources that provide evidence of this. The Aldine history says that Dixons were making 800 pairs of shoes weekly by 1888. And newspaper reports from 1927 and 1931 cite 5,000 and 10,000 pairs of boots per week, respectively. Dixons was soon to become the largest men's shoe manufacturer in Australia. Now, this is similar to the previous image, but taken post TC's passing. And Joseph Dixon, you can see in the arrow there. Not sure whether the figure beside is William or one of his other managers. Even in wartime, Dixons managed well. Bootmaking was a reserved occupation, so they didn't lose many of their workforce to the armed forces. Moreover, many of the boot manufacturers were co-opted to producing boots for the military. Dixons produced army boots for World War I, and they got a contract for 80,000 pairs of boots in 1940 for World War II. Then, in 1944, they also got a 12-month contract to produce 175 pairs of shoes weekly for discharged soldiers. Now, earlier I referred to Dixons and retailing. Although TC set up a shop in the city and did try importing, it really was the manufacture of hides, leather goods and footwear that became the company's strength. The strategy was to supply retailers across Queensland and beyond. Dixons initially made boots for everyone, but later they focused on men's footwear. My neighbour told me that she always bought Thomas Dixon shoes for her school lads. I'm particularly fond of this ad. It appeared in 1925, and it tells us a lot about Dixons. Most notably, it features a Dixon trademark, the Castlebound boots and shoes. TC had registered this in 1897, this trademark, and it was a name that would continue into the 20th century and into the history of boot footwear in this country. Now, you note that it's a trademark and not a style, because many various styles of footwear were made under the Castle brand. Back to the ad. It tells us that the Castle boots and shoes were available in Wallaby and Kid. It shows both the factory and the tannery, obviously sources of not only company pride but civic pride. It tells us that Dixons at this time were manufacturing shoes and boots for men, women and children. You might wonder, there's reference there to bark and chrome tanning. Chrome tanning is a method of preserving the raw hide by using chromium salts, and it was first introduced in about mid-1800s as an alternative to organic material used for tanning, such as bark. Now, there are pros and cons on both methods, so I won't go into those. It also tells us that ads were not only simply tanners, but they were leather dressers, and that's the next stage of leather production. It's when the tanned hide is coloured and polished and made ready for whatever end product is desired. It also mentions that the company has branches in Sydney and Melbourne, and, importantly, that Dixon footwear was available from leading stores across Australia. Now, this ad appeared in the Municipal History of South Brisbane, and I think it possibly was produced specifically for that publication because I haven't found it replicated anywhere else. Now, T C Dixon's was well and truly on the map, and this is evidenced. In 1927, the company hosted a tour of the complex by the then Duke of York during that royal couple's visit to the Commonwealth. It was followed by a vice-regal recognition also when the new governor, Sir John Goodwin and Lady Goodwin, also visited Dixon's factory later in the same year. Now, post-war, the third Dixon generation took over. Tom Dixon focused on the factory. Full name Thomas Ernest Alexander Dixon, but known as Tom. And looking after the tannery side was Victor Charles Dixon, son of William Dixon. And these two carried the company further into the present. There was also expansion of the company with several acquisitions. Security Shoes. It was a company that was developed and put together by Charles Jodrell, post-war. He was a disabled returned serviceman and he planned to employ disabled returned servicemen in his business. Similarly, in the same year, this is 1967, the F.T. Morris Boot Factory was acquired. F.T. Morris Boot Factory was a long-standing competitor and had been established in 1888 by Reuben Morris. And this is an image taken much later after the factory was repurposed for the Spaghetti Emporium. Anyone remember that? Good. Now, after the acquisition by Dixon's, F.T. Morris continued as per normal under that name, but under the Dixon ownership. The company also strengthened their connections with Mathers. Just go back to that one. Sorry. You might remember Mathers. I'm sure all of you remember Mathers, a retail business founded by William Mathers in Ipswich in 1923, which by the 60s had become a chain of shoe shops. And this is Mathers' store in Ipswich in the 1860s. Oh, where is it? Gone again. Sorry, messed this up. There we are. Mathers' store in Ipswich in the 1960s. Now, as Gavin's already preempted and told you part of my story, thank you, Gavin, by the 1970s, Australian textiles and the allied industries were facing challenges from free trade and cheaper synthetics. Tanneries were also facing stricter pollution laws. These factors led to the closure of the Dixon Tannery in 1970. Thereafter, the boot factory had to source their leather from elsewhere, and the other Dixon tannery in Hemmant, which had been established post-war by William Dixon's son, Donald, then became the primary source, or one of the major sources, for leather for the boot factory at West End. Now, Tom Dixon closed the Montague factory in 1973. He moved the whole boot-making operation to Wacol in partnership with Mathers and the Queensland Retailers Association. There was a name change to Thomas Dixon Holdings Limited. The new state-of-the-art factory featured not only a raft of new machinery, but also a creche and a swimming pool for employees. Now, that partnership, it finished within that same year, but the Wacol operation continued until 1980. So ended a family business when it closed in 1980, a business that had lasted for 100 years and had survived fires, floods, 2 wars and changing fashions, while still being a leader in the production of footwear in Australia. Now, some of the boots and shoes made by T C Dixon. These have been difficult to track down, as you can imagine, because who keeps shoes that are old or worn out or out of fashion? Someone does, especially if they're shoes like Thomas Dixon. Some of these have stories, some have been detached from their stories. Pleasure fit shoes, these are found in the State Library, not only in the Thomas Dixon collection, but in the Rawlings collection. Valente shoe, the lovely display stand, was found also in the Rawlings collection in the State Library. Riding boots, Kate from Cannon Hill, well worn and well loved. Valente shoes, bought on eBay, no provenance. Some of you might recognise some of these styles. I'm sure some of you have worn them at some time. Tuscan shoe, State Library of Queensland has that now, purchased on eBay. And some ankle boots, again, bought on eBay, no provenance. And this is the Chelsea boot. Anyone remember Chelsea boots? They were particularly worn by the rockers of British young rockers. And those boots are in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. Now, there is an addendum. After closure in 1970, the Montague Road buildings had various changes and were repurposed for various purposes. The tannery now houses a geotech engineering company, and the boot factory has recently undergone a major makeover as home of Queensland Ballet. Thanks very much to the vision and drive and passion of Lee Shwin Singh. Now that restored and repurposed boot factory has been named the Thomas Dixon Centre to commemorate its history and its origins. And I'll just do a little plug for the Thomas Dixon Centre. Take one of their tours, please do, for an immersive experience into the history of the company, the history of the factory, and also its new life as a community cultural centre. And before I conclude, I do want to pay my respects and thanks to the people who've helped me on this journey. I'd particularly like to pay tribute to Marilyn England, who did a body of research on the company and published a book, Boots to Ballet Shoes. And if you go upstairs, you will see that in the White Gloves experience. Marilyn was a historian. Sadly, she passed away in 2020, colleague and friend. But fortunately, I have her files on the Dixon factory, so I was able to build on her research. Very, very special thanks to two ladies. To Jocelyn Dixon, who is a great-great-granddaughter of T C Dixon, daughter of William Dixon and granddaughter of William Dixon and daughter of Vincent Dixon. And also to Kerry Vixner, who's a great-great-granddaughter of T C Dixon, granddaughter of Ernest and daughter of Tom Dixon. I've got those right. Those two Dixon girls have been incredibly supportive of my research project and have provided valuable information. And finally, I would like to thank John Osborne for funding this fellowship, and special thanks to the members of the State Library, particularly for Troy. I've driven him up the wall, I think, at times, and Chrissy, and also for Tanya in particular, thanks. But all the other staff have been fantastic. And thanks to all the others who've helped me on this journey.
These boots are made for walking, and that's just what